Jackson, Tennessee's Hungry Hearts. We are celebrating Hanukkah right now, and it is also the Sabbath, so welcome to the Sabbath. And so we're going to talk a bit about the Maccabees today and how it relates to Yeshua and how it relates to us as individuals. So I'm going to start with some history. I apologize if it seems a little dry, but it's important. I did have a family member ask me just yesterday, what exactly is Hanukkah about? And, he knew the basic premise of what Hanukkah was, that there was a battle and there were some evil people, and then they won, and then they had oil, and we fry things now. But he didn't really understand the significance of what Hanukkah was or exactly how they were being abused and what caused the war. So the Maccabees flourished in the 2nd century BC. It was a priestly family of Jews who organized a successful rebellion against the Seleucid ruler Antiochus IV, and they then consecrated the defiled temple of Jerusalem. The events leading up to the Maccabean revolt were prophesied in vivid detail in the Old Testament, book of Daniel, in chapter 8. And the angel Gabriel described to the prophet Daniel the oncoming abomination of a king who would put a stop to sacrifices and desecrate the sanctuary. The fact that this was prophesied some 250 years before it occurred indicates how serious the threat was to the Jewish people. The Maccabean revolt was a turning point in history that saved the Jewish people and their religion from the threat of extinction. This story and the various archaeological finds that support it provide further proof as to the existence of the temple in Jerusalem. So while Israel's modern-day enemies attempt to rewrite history and distort fact by denying the temple ever existed in Jerusalem, the celebration of the Hanukkah story takes on a new meaning. The historical context of the Maccabees. Well, the name Maccabees was not really their last name. Their Maccabee was a title of honor given to Judas, a son of Matthias, and the hero of the Jewish Wars of Independence. This was in 168 through 164 BC. Later, the name Maccabees was extended to include his whole family, specifically Matthias, his father, and Judas' 4 brothers, John, Simon, Eleazar, and Jonathan. Its use was also extended to John Hyrcanus, Simon's son, who was next in succession. So you can I'm sort of throwing all these names out there. So the meaning of the title Maccabee, if you were reading it in Hebrew would read hammer or hammerer. So he was basically Judas the hammerer. Okay? And it can also mean extinguish. Since Judas held the initiative in the long war against the Syrians, he was probably regarded in the same light as King Edward I of England, who was known as the Hammer of the Scots. Throughout the 2nd century BC, the city-state of Jerusalem, Judea, lay between the two great powers of Egypt and Syria. Now, you have to understand that at that time, Alexander the Great had this huge empire before he died, and he was Greek. Therefore, all the people that were in power were Greek. They weren't Egyptians, and they weren't Jews, and they weren't Syrians. They were Cleopatra was a Greek, and just the people who were sitting in power at that time, they were all Greek. The Ptolemies ruled in Egypt, and the Seleucids in Syria, but again, they were actually just Greeks. These were residual states that had been left when Alexander the Great's empire broke up about 20 years after his death. Antiochus IV ruled Syria from 175 to 163 BC. He carried the substitute name Epiphanes, a Greek word meaning God manifest. Little g, please. A conqueror of overwhelming pride, as he is described in the book of Daniel in the Bible, he set out to seize Judea, which until then had been a province of Egypt. He aimed, moreover, to unify his vast empire behind the worship of Zeus, and therefore severely restricted the practice of Judaism, whose strict monotheism impeded the realization of his policy. In Antiochus' day, the Syrians were devotees of the culture of Greece. Antiochus sought to continue what he regarded as the colonization process of Alexander. And I just sort of want to point out now that we're having a lot of debate about how all these people, we colonized America, we colonized Australia, we colonized this, well, yeah, because it's been going on like since the BCs. It's just something that happens when one group of people conquer or take over the territory of another. I mean, it's just sort of one of those things that nobody's ever going to get around. Just a little thought there. So Antiochus sought to continue what he regarded as the civilization and colonization process. For him, culture meant the pursuit of the good. This sort of one of those things where the good could mean anything, because it depends on how you think. The restless, inquiring, creative spirit of Greece, what might today be called the scientific spirit, was based on the assumption that man is a measure of all things. So again, it's man versus man and that whole psychological thing. It's what that particular man wants. It's not about what God wants. It's about what man wants. The Jewish view of life, on the other hand, was totally in opposition to the Hellenism that had spread through the Middle East. It too was a total way of life. One lived in accordance with what the Jewish people believed was revelation. They regarded Hellenism as a form of nature worship. They saw it as a spiritual continuation of the religion of the Canaanites, who had presented their views against Israel for all the centuries since the day of Joshua. They were aghast that Antiochus encouraged the Semitic peoples of the Mediterranean coast to regard him as the ancient god Baal of the Canaanites. The Canaanite gods, they asserted, were merely the mythologizing of anger, hate, lust, envy, and greed of unregulated human hearts. Israel, its prophets proclaimed, was the chosen instrument of the transcendent God, whose name I will not say, but he's the Father. So the Father was utterly other than human. That is to say, he was holy. It was God who had created humanity, not man. The gods, and Israel was God's chosen instrument to be a light to lighten the nations, as was said in Isaiah. To make the meaning of its special relationship to God evident to the Word was therefore Israel's reason for being. They were placed to be a shining beacon to all the nations, to learn those ways and to spread them and to show how good God is. Its task was to put the revelation of God into purposefulness use by producing an ordered human society that was ruled by God's justice and love and not human force and greed. Because, when you get into human force and greed, it goes downhill real fast, as we're seeing in the United States right now. Okay, so the conception of revealed religion and of loyalty to the Word of God rather than a human king, Antiochus could not appreciate, particularly since he himself delighted in the name God Manifest, in order to get rid of the faith of Israel. Therefore, he attacked Israel's religious practices. So let me tell you what he did. He forbade the observance of Sabbath and all of the traditional feasts, for these had been ordained by a jealous or intolerant God. All sacrifices were to come to an end. He forbade the reading of the law of Moses, and he gave orders to search out and burn any copies that could be found. He forbade the practice of circumcision, for it was that set the Jews off from other peoples as the people of God. That's exactly what God wanted it to be. That's why he had them start circumcising. In place of these practices, Antiochus encouraged the development of cultural clubs called gymnasia. We call them gymnasiums now in the United States, in which people gathered to study, to learn, and to enjoy each other's company. After competing in various forms of athletics, men and women used to soak themselves in hot baths. But because the pursuit of the good included a delight in the body beautiful, such activities were performed naked. A circumcised Jew taking part in the games in a gymnasium could not therefore hide where his loyalties lay. Okay? Finally, in 168 BC, Antiochus invaded Jerusalem and desacralized the Holy of Holies in the temple. This was the one place on earth about which God said, "My name shall be there." That's in 1 Kings. A number of Jews under their leader, Jason, the high priest, took the easy way of conformity with the new universal trends. Does this sound familiar? But with Antiochus' impious act, a strong general reaction set in. Thus, when he later came that same year, he came to Jerusalem again. This time he plundered and burned everything. And he set up his citadel in Acra. And that's a hill that overlooks the temple courts. And so that should also kind of give you an idea of exactly where the temple was, because that hill's still there. But he went too far for his final act of spite. On December 25th, 167 BC, he went to the temple in Jerusalem, and to the Olympian god Zeus, he sacrificed a pig, which, as we know, is an unclean animal and therefore should not be touched, let alone sacrificed in the Holy of Holies. Well, the home of Matthias, a priest in the village of it's Modi'in back then. Now it's called Modi'in. I don't know why. It's about 17 miles northwest of Jerusalem, and they quickly became the center of resistance. With him were his 5 sons: John Gaddy, Simon Thassi, Judas Maccabeus, Eleazar Avaron, and Jonathan Ephesus. I think. I apologize for not being able to pronounce these correctly. Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian, gave Matthias' great-grandfather the surname Asamonearis. Okay, yes, I know, it's probably not anywhere close. From this title came the name Hasmonean, that was applied to the dynasty that descended from the Maccabees in the following century. So Matthias sparked the resistance movement by striking a Jew who was preparing to offer sacrifice to the new gods, and by killing the king's officer who was standing by. It's one of those things, if you'll just do this, it'll all be good, and then we can call it a day, and nobody gets hurt. But they were greatly offended by this because it was totally went beyond anything they could comprehend ever doing. So then he and his family went to the hills. Well, that was a good thing for them because from there they started having a lot of people who joined them, especially the Hasidians, a pious and strict group deeply concerned for the law of Moses. These at first refused to fight on the Sabbath, and at once they lost 1,000 lives. Matthias then insisted that all groups of resistors should fight, if required, on the Holy Sabbath. The guerrilla war that followed was as much a civil war as a national war of resistance. He treated all degrees of collaborators with the same bitterness that he did with the Syrian enemy. In other words, if his little spies saw that you were like yielding to whatever the Hellenists were speaking that day, or it could even be other Jews that were in collusion with them, well, you weren't going to be long for this earth. So Matthias treated all of them the same as he did the Syrians, and after the death of Mattathias, there you go. In 166 BC, Judas Maccabeus, the third son, became the leader of the resistance movement. In his first battle, he seized the sword of Apollonius, governor of Samaria, the general leading the opposing army. That sort of had to be embarrassing. But he was also a man of faith in the God of his fathers. He saw himself as a charismatic, divinely appointed leader, like Gideon of old. He would pause in his guerrilla tactics to assemble his men to watch and pray and to read the Torah. And they would do that all together. So Judah saw his task as that of the successor of Moses and Joshua. Remember how our fathers were saved at the Red Sea, he told his men, when Pharaoh with his forces pursued them? Now, this is in 1 Maccabees 4:9. Then they would blow their trumpets, and as the day of Joshua, and engage the enemy with renewed vigor. Well, God was on their side. Amen. And with them honoring him by praising and reading the word and those things that they were doing, well, that had to make the Lord be like, okay, we can do this. I'm on your side. Yeah. And then, but I'm going to tell you, Judas was not a nice person. He could be very cruel, and he was. After the manner of his time, and also of his enemies, he was ready to exterminate all the males of a conquered city. Some of his activities are in accord with what today would be called the rules for holy war. As found scattered in sections of Deuteronomy and as developed in great detail in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls written within the century following Judas and now titled The War of the Sons of Light Against the Sons of Darkness. Christians today would do well to remember the faithfulness of God to the Jews on that first Hanukkah. Had Antiochus succeeded to annihilate the nations of Israel, there would have been no Jewish woman named Mary to become the mother of Jesus. Come on, tell that now. So in December of 164 BC, the years after Antiochus had defiled the temple, Judas recaptured Jerusalem, all except the Acra. Judas then had blameless priests cleanse the holy place and erect a new altar of unhewn stones in accordance with the word. Then they reconsecrated the sanctuary on December 24th, which was Kislev 25 in the Hebrew calendar. The Hebrew word for this act, Hanukkah, means dedication, is the name still used for the Jewish 8-day festival of lights that commemorates the event, which begins on Kislev 25 in the Jewish religious year. Judas next continued the war elsewhere, in Galilee and even in Transjordan, His name was greatly honored in all of Israel among the Gentiles. So, I mean, it just wasn't his people. I mean, even the Gentiles of that time were under this strict rule of the Hellenists. And so they were being abused also. This is a quote from Maccabees 5:63. In all Israel and among the Gentiles, he was greatly honored. So, I mean, that's a direct quote. And if you've never read the book of Maccabees, it's a little dry because it's history. But at the same time, it really highlights not just Hanukkah, but how God moved through them for his own purpose to bring about, I think, to directly bring about Hanukkah. And I'll get to more of that later. The Syrians in the war against Judah, Maccabees, they fastened wood towers on elephants' backs, and each beast, can you imagine, then charged into battle with 1,000 armored warriors surrounding it. So, do you know in Lord of the Rings, when those people on those huge beasts? Yeah, that's what it was like. And you know how, the little elf, he's like doing the arrows and they're hacking away with swords and well, that's exactly what it was. That was like exactly like it was. So it gives you a visual there. Okay, so Eleazar, Judah's second youngest brother, he lost his life in 163 BC when he stabbed an elephant from underneath. In dying, the beast fell on him and crushed him. And when Antiochus Epiphanes died in 164 BC, others administrated the kingdom because his son, Antiochus Eupator, was still a minor. Lysias, the Syrian general, was now the real power. So a peace of sorts was agreed upon between Judas and the Syrian general, who was having trouble other places. And so in doing that, Judas secured the liberty of conscience and worship. So they were still vassals, but they were allowed to start back with in the temple and resume the religious rites and things, and being circumcised and being able to learn their language again. So then Jonathan, his brother, succeeded him as general, and Jonathan more than sustained the dignity of Judas. King Alexander Belus, also known as Alexander Epiphanes, that was a popular name, now in control, made peace with Jonathan, calling him his friend. And in 153 or 152, they're not sure, he elected Jonathan as high priest in Jerusalem. Now, you just need to also understand, he was not of the Levitical line. But because of this being done, there was born the high priestly line Hasmonean. The strict upholders of the law, however, were alienated because the law held that no man should be high priest who was not of priestly descent from Aaron. From now on, this group formed a strong opposition party. Yeah, it's like you can't do anything, you're going to get opposed. Later to be known as the most conservative section of the Pharisees, the religious group whose interpretations and applications of the law, written and oral, became accepted tradition in later Judaism. The war continued. The Acra was still in enemy hands, and Jonathan sought to wall it off from the city. But then he died by treachery and was succeeded by his brother Simon. He was a man of character and prudence as well as a born leader who had quietly and loyally served under his other brothers. On his own initiative, Simon brought peace and security to Jerusalem. He was the second Hasmonean high priest, but he was assassinated. These, yeah, I mean, yeah. The succession of the Maccabees was maintained by Simon's son John, later known as Hyrcanus I. He remained as high priest in Jerusalem until his death in 104 BC. It was a long and disturbed reign, but he consolidated and extended Jewish control, bringing Samaria into subjection and even forcing the descendants of the ancient Edomites who lived southeast of the Dead Sea to accept Judaism. And this is how the Idumean king Herod of Jesus' day was a Jew by religion, but not by birth. Okay. John Hyrcanus' reign marked a turning point in the history of the Maccabees. The movement that had begun with intense conviction and deep patriotic zeal had so completely succeeded that all memory of its first wild enthusiasm was gone. John, in spirit, had become a Sadducee, an upper-class conservative who accepted only the written law as divinely revealed and authoritative. In outlook, he was worldly, agnostic, and urbane, utterly unlike his grandfather. Do you see that in people? I see that in our leaders especially. So let's look at what the Bible says in Luke 2, 8 and 9. Now there were in the same country shepherds living out in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were greatly afraid. According to the Bible commentator Adam Clarke, it was customary for the Jews to send their sheep to pasture in the spring until early October. As the cold winter months began, the flocks would return from the fields for shelter and warmth. Since the shepherds were still tending their flocks in the fields around Bethlehem, it can be concluded that the angels announced the news of Jesus' birth no later than October. So there are clues to determine Jesus' birth. We can find some additional clues to answer the question of when was Jesus really born by looking at the birth of John the Baptist. Luke 1 tells of Zacharias, who was from the priestly order of Abijah, and his barren wife Elizabeth becoming pregnant with John the Baptist after his days of service in the temple. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, Gabriel visited Mary with the news that she would give birth to Jesus. The approximate month of Jesus' birth can thus be determined by counting from the date of Zacharias' priestly service until the birth of Jesus. Jewish priests were divided into 24 courses which administered through the year in the temple. The order of Abijah was the 8th priestly course, presented to us in 1 Chronicles 24, 6 through 19, which served in the temple during the 10th week of the priestly cycle. The start of the 10th week coincided with the second Sabbath in the month of Sivan, which runs approximately from mid-May to mid-June. Soon after Zechariah returned from his priestly duties, Elizabeth became pregnant with John the Baptist. And we kind of know what happened there because we read that a lot. So Luke 1, 24 through 28 and 31 records the event. Now after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and she hid herself 5 months, saying, "Thus the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among people." Because, during that time, if you were a barren woman, you did something wrong. That was, somehow you offended God. Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and having come in, the angel said to her, "Rejoice, highly favored one, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus," Yeshua. Therefore, according to the text above, We can approximate the month of Jesus' birth to be around the time of Tishri, which is mid to late September. To arrive at this date, start at the conception of John the Baptist, that would have been in June. Count forward 6 months to the arrival of Gabriel's announcement of the conception of Jesus, that was in December. Then count forward 9 more months to make it for human gestation to reach Tishri, which is September, when Jesus was born. That was not hard. It's not hard. It baffles me when people say, he was born in March. Oh, that was a short pregnancy. Okay. In John 8:12, again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I'm sorry. I need to back up a little bit. Okay, yes. Okay, so in John 8:12, Jesus spoke, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of light. Now, then in John 9:5, he says, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And then in 1 John 1:5, this is the message we've heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him, that light's in him. Okay. And then in 1 John 12:35, the light is among you for a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. The one who walks in the darkness does not know where he is going. So the reason I read those is because it all has to do with how Yeshua, Jesus, is perceived during that time. For me, it says that Jesus was conceived during Hanukkah. It has been verified that the Nativity Day coincides with Kislev 25, first day of the Hebrew feast Hanukkah. Indeed, astronomical software allows to reconstruct ancient luni-solar calendars. Israel was celebrating the rededication of the temple some 200 years before. I like to think of that time as Americans would the 4th of July. It also says to me, fight for what Yeshua has commissioned us to fight for in this world, to take back what Satan has taken from us, to gabosh which means to have dominion over, or take back, just as they did in the time of the Maccabees. They took back from Antiochus what he had taken from them, or tried to take from them. So when you look back, for many years, the people had missed Sukkot. And they were desperately trying to get it ready for the temple for the feast of Sukkot. But it was pretty impossible because they had missed it, because it was back in either September or October, because it moves a little. So they had finally become free of their oppressors, and so they were moving forward. They really wanted to do Sukkot again. I mean, it was really heavy on their minds, but other things happen. And so they settled on a late Sukkot and an 8-day celebration. That's why Hanukkah is 8 days. And it was really quite some time after harvest time. So the problem arose that there was only enough purified oil for one night. The priest filled the lamp of the menorah, and miraculously the menorah lights burned for the entire 8 days and nights until more oil could be processed. And of course, that's why we call it the Festival of Lights, as well as the Feast of Dedication. The Grecian yoke thrown off by the Maccabees was quickly restored under Roman rule. Yay. Okay. The Romans were not as concerned with destroying Jewish religious practices and customs as the Greeks, But Roman ruled Israel with an iron fist. Now, here's the thing that I read and in something else that I was reading about Roman rule, or maybe I saw it on the documentary, I can't remember. One of the ways that the Romans would make it palpable for people that they conquered was that they did allow them to continue with their religious practices or whatever things they celebrated. They were like, oh yeah, you can still do that, just go right ahead, but pay us your taxes. Which I think is why Jesus was like, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, keep the peace. Israel was once again experiencing winter. It's the first line. This was the world that Jerusalem grew up in. Yeshua grew up in. There was constant and sometimes deadly bickering between the various religious factions. In fact, there were some 22 different sects of Judaism active during some part of Yeshua's life. Well, we probably have that many practicing in the United States right now, if not more. You can step out the door and go to any church that fits your particular religious beliefs. 6 different Sabbath-keeping churches in Jackson. And so, as if Jewish political opponents killing you wasn't enough, they always had the Romans to contend with. The Roman Empire was much more resilient than the Greeks, so there was little hope of freedom from Rome. And something else I realized while I was preparing this message, just as the Jews rallied behind Judas Maccabee against the Roman bondage, the bondage of the Greeks. The last time I spoke here in Jackson, I hypothesized that Yeshua did not live up to the image of the Messiah that they had in their heads. In a nutshell, they were expecting a Judas Maccabee, not a carpenter from Nazareth who told everyone to love each other, forgive each other of their sin, keep the commandments, and that violence was not the answer. So in John 10:22 and 23, the Bible says it was winter. In Jerusalem, Yeshua was walking in the temple around Solomon's colonnade, looking at 2 things, Hanukkah and Yeshua. Hanukkah was a celebration of survival of unspeakable horrors. It was a celebration of the mercy of God in granting Israel salvation from their oppressors. It was a celebration of the rededication of the worship of the one true God. It was a cause of hope. However, Hanukkah was only a celebration, and no matter how well intended, was insufficient in battling the demons of despair and depression that was in Jerusalem at that time. When Solomon dedicated the first temple, the records show that the glory of God filled the temple. In 1 Kings 8:10 through 11, now that the priests came out of the holy place, the cloud filled the house of Adonai, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of Adonai filled the house of Adonai. So the Hebrew word here for glory is kavod, and it means weight. I have felt the weight of the kavod of the Lord, and you do not stand up. You will bend in your chair. You'll be it'll push you off in the floor. There's no way to get out from under it when it's on you. And the thing is once you experience it, you live to experience it again. Amen. The temple housed the Ark of the Covenant, where God had said he would dwell with the people. The people had abused the Ark, and the glory of God's presence had lifted. But at the dedication, God had restored his presence. 500 years of failure of the Jewish people to follow God's Torah resulted in the destruction of the temple in 586 BC. Nearly 100 years passed before the temple was rebuilt. But there was a difference. The ark had been lost. And God's presence was not there as it was in Solomon's day. They had a temple. The priest rebuilt furnishings, but they had no presence. But John tells us that on that cold day in Jerusalem during the festival of Hanukkah, God's presence returned. Yeshua was walking in the temple. Roughly 1,000 years after God's glory settled on the temple, God's Son was in the temple. There was no weight of God's glory forcing men to the ground, but the words Yeshua uttered while surrounded by his critics would start in motion God's plan for the salvation of man. This group of unbelievers, much like a lynch mob, didn't want the truth. They had already decided he was a blasphemer, and they only wanted his words to legally condemn him. But Jesus responded with a clever answer. John 10:27-30. My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life. They will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Well, you know, this went over like a lead balloon. The religious leaders wanted to stone Yeshua because he said, I am Ben Elohim, the Son of God. With that encounter, things in Jerusalem, or in the entire world for that matter, would never be the same. Yeshua was in the temple. Yeshua should be in our temple. He should be sitting on the throne of our hearts and our minds. He should be, his kavod should be within us, and we should be shining our lights so everyone can see. So while the people rejoiced and celebrated the cleansing and rededication of the temple, one greater than the temple stood in their midst. Matthew 12:6. I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. Remember a minute ago I said that the glory of God's presence was no longer in the temple? God's glory had once again resided in the tabernacle and then the temple. But God's Shekinah glory now resides in his Son. As John states so beautifully, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And then in John 1:14, early in Jesus' ministry, he identified himself as the new temple. In John 2:19, he told the religious leaders in Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. John tells us Yeshua was speaking of the temple of his body. The temple, which meant so much to the Jewish people, especially during the Feast of Dedication, was merely a temporary fixture until the coming of this true temple. In his life and death and resurrection, Jesus replaced the temple and became the place where we meet God and experience his glory. The imagery of light plays an important role in Hanukkah because the light of the temple was extinguished during the Syrian desecration and then was restored by Judas Maccabee. But John wants us to see that Yeshua is a light who shines brighter than Hanukkah's lights. In John 8:12, Yeshua says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So what is the spiritual significance of Hanukkah? Hanukkah commemorates spiritual independence over despotism. Light over darkness. This is something that Judas Maccabee could never say. The darkness that engulfed the Jewish nation under the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes wasn't fully removed by the victory of Judas, but only by the victory of Yeshua. And Yeshua continues to shine in the darkness, and the forces of darkness will never overpower him. A day is coming when the New Jerusalem will have no need of heavenly or earthly luminaries, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. Revelations 21:23. Yeshua is our great hero. Yeshua is our great temple. Yeshua is our greater light. And Yeshua fulfills Hanukkah. We're going to say the Aleinu to close out our service. Aleinu leshabeach la'adon ha'kol. La'deit gedula le'etzer bereshit. Shalo asanu kegoye harazot. Velo samanu kamishbikot ha'adama. Shalo sam kalkenu kahim. Vagor aleinu kekol hamanam. V'anaknu korim umishtakovim umodim. Lifnei malek malkei hamlakim hakodesh baruchu. B'nei emor v'hai Adonai lamelik al kol haaretz. Bayom hahu Yeh Adonai echad. Ushamo echad. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Oh, did you want it on here? Oh, okay.
David Lindsay.
Yes.
William Schultz.
David Lindsay, William Schultz, and Vivian Smith. We're going to say Kaddish for today. And Judy LaFont. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadesh Sharei Bama. V'amal devra kirute v'yom lit malkute b'kaye kom uvyome kom yuvkaye deko beit Israel ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yahei Shemei Rabbah Mavorak Le'alam Ulameis Almaya. Yit Barak V'yish Tabak V'yit Hadar V'yit Ramah V'yit Nisei V'yit Hadar V'yit Alei V'yit Halal Shemei De Kudusha Birku Leila Min Kol Birkata V'shurata Tushbikata V'nekamata Da Amiran V'yamal V'yamru Amen. Yeshei Shlama Rabbah Min Shemaya V'kaim Aleinu V'al Kol Israel V'yamru Amen. O say Shalom Ben Ramav Huya say Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Israel V'yamru Amen. Yosef Adonai Alekem V'yal B'nakem Barukim atem la'Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz.
Pastor Bill Schultz, I hope that you enjoyed this message. I hope it encourages you to have a closer walk with Jesus and helps you to get stronger in the Word of God. If you're interested in more information about Hungry Hearts Ministries, you can go to either one of our websites, hungryheartsministry.com or hungryheartschurch.com for more information. We have many free materials available, including our magazine Pursuit. If you will email me at hungryheartsmin@aol.com, I will mail this to you every quarter. The only thing that we're ever going to use your mailing address for is to send you this magazine or maybe invite you to a meeting. Hope you enjoyed this message, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.